My daughter, Ashley, told me I'd be just fine in the garage. She tossed my belongings onto the cold floor, treating me like I was just useless junk in my own home. My house, which I had spent years building, was now hers and her husband's. After 2 nights of sleeping in the garage, I handed her a document on the 3rd night that completely changed everything. The moment I walked into the kitchen with groceries, Ashley's voice sliced through the air. I hadn't even had a chance to set the bags down when she announced we needed to talk. Then she delivered the news. I was moving to the garage that night. The milk carton in my hand slipped, hitting the linoleum with a wet thud. I was so stunned I had to ask her to repeat herself. She explained that Brian needed a proper office for his business ventures, and the garage was perfect for me. With her arms crossed in the doorway, she spoke about it as if it were a simple weather update. She listed the amenities: electricity, my old couch, and plenty of space for my stuff. My hands froze on the counter. I tried to remind her that this was my house, but she just insisted it was their house too, claiming they had been contributing for 3 years. I saw that stubborn tilt of her chin, the same one she had as a child when she wanted something she couldn't have. She then casually mentioned that she had already moved my pillow and blanket out to the garage. Her words felt like a physical punch. I turned to face her, completely forgetting the groceries. I was so shocked, I just stood there. Brian then appeared behind her, his shoulders hunched as he avoided my gaze. He tried to reassure me it was only temporary, just until his consulting firm took off. I couldn't hide my disbelief. I thought about how he hadn't worked a day since marrying my daughter. Ashley quickly interjected, her voice sharp, saying that was unfair and that Brian had been busy developing his business model and making connections. She insisted that real entrepreneurship takes time. I could feel my voice rising as I reminded her that I had paid for their groceries, utilities, and car insurance for 3 years, and now they wanted me to sleep in my own garage. She just waved her hand dismissively and told me not to be so dramatic. She claimed it wasn't like they were throwing me out and that the garage was perfectly comfortable, even mentioning she'd put a space heater in there for me. I looked at the woman who was my daughter in form, but a complete stranger in spirit. I reminded her that her mother, Margaret, and I had built this house with our own hands. Ashley's words were cold as she told me that Mom had been gone for 5 years and that I couldn't keep living in the past. She insisted that we were a family now, and families make sacrifices. Brian finally spoke up, suggesting that maybe we could work out a schedule so I could use the bedroom on weekends. The idea of scheduling time in my own room was so ridiculous I almost laughed, but a cold, hard feeling settled in my chest instead. Ashley immediately jumped on his suggestion, claiming they were just trying to find a solution that worked for everyone. I stood up to my full height, feeling the weight of my 62 years, and simply said no. Ashley's face turned red, and she accused me of being incredibly selfish after all they had done for me. She listed cooking, cleaning, and keeping me company since my wife had passed away. She wanted to know if this was how I was going to repay them. I asked her if she really meant repay. The words were louder than I intended. I was paying for their food, and they were living under my roof for free. Ashley's voice wavered with what I knew was fake emotion as she insisted they had been taking care of me. She asked if I knew how hard it was to watch me moping around the empty house. Brian eagerly agreed, saying they could have gotten their own place years ago but didn't want to leave me alone. I looked at the two of them, my daughter with her perfect hair and manicured nails, unemployed for 8 months, and her husband in designer jeans and sneakers that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The thought of them taking care of me was beyond ridiculous. Ashley's facade of concern disappeared, and she told me with a cold, final tone that if I didn't like the arrangement, I was free to leave any time. "Fine, have it your way," she said, turning on her heel and marching toward my bedroom. She added that she wasn't going to bother unpacking the things she had already moved. I followed her down the hallway with Brian slinking along behind us, like a guilty shadow. The door to my bedroom was wide open, and I could see my dresser drawers pulled out and half my clothes already missing. I told Ashley to stop, but she ignored me, continuing to yank shirts from hangers and toss them into a laundry basket. She told me I had made my choice and now had to live with it. The scraping of metal hangers against the closet rod filled the silence. Every shirt she removed felt like a piece of my life being erased. Margaret's clothes were still in her half of the closet, a part of her I could never bring myself to get rid of. Now, my own daughter was clearing out my side as if I were already dead. My voice came out rougher than I intended as I insisted these were my belongings in my house. She told me they weren't anymore. Then she grabbed a stack of my sweaters, the ones Margaret had bought me for Christmas over the years. She told me that if I wanted to be stubborn, that was fine, but Brian had a business meeting tomorrow and needed space to get ready. I just stood in the doorway of my own bedroom, watching my daughter pack my life into boxes and baskets while her unemployed husband stood by, nodding in agreement, as if this were a completely reasonable situation. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the room where Margaret and I had slept for 27 years. I knew the milk carton was likely still leaking on the kitchen floor. 3 hours later, I was sitting in the garage on the thin blanket Ashley had thrown down for me, my back pressed against the cold concrete wall. The space heater she had mentioned was ancient and barely warmed the air within a 2-foot radius around my knees. Motor oil stains marked the floor where my car used to be before I had to move it outside to make room for their boxes. From above, I could hear footsteps crossing what used to be my bedroom, and the faint sound of laughter drifted down. I knew they were celebrating their victory. I suddenly needed my reading glasses to go over some insurance papers. In the corner sat the small metal filing cabinet I had kept for 20 years, holding all the important documents Margaret had insisted I organize. She used to tell me, while tapping the locked drawer with her wedding ring, that I never knew when I might need them. The key was still hanging on the same nail behind my workbench. Inside, manila folders were lined up like soldiers, labeled insurance, tax returns, home improvements, and medical bills. I had written each label in my own careful block letters, with the same precision I had used to draw blueprints. I pulled out the folder labeled Ashley Support. Without thinking about why I had started that file 3 years ago, the first receipt hit me like a splash of ice water. $2,047 for her wedding dress alterations. I had completely forgotten about that emergency call 2 weeks before the wedding. She had said the dress doesn't fit, and the seamstress wants cash up front. There was another receipt for $3,200 for a reception hall deposit after their original venue fell through. A wedding that was supposed to cost $6,000 ended up costing a total of $12,000. More papers started spilling out. There were papers documenting Brian's first business venture, a $4,500 investment in premium marketing materials that never led to any clients. His second attempt cost $3,800 for an industry certification in a consulting field I had never even heard of. That was 8 months ago, right after Ashley had lost her job. There were receipts for $20,000 and $23,000 during Ashley's unemployment. They had asked for $18,000 in home improvements, including converting the guest room into an office and upgrading the kitchen appliances because theirs were too small for a family. There was also an additional $21,000 for higher utility bills, groceries, and car insurance. The total was $89,000. For 5 years, I had quietly written checks, transferred money, and covered one emergency after another. I had always told myself it was only temporary, that family helped family, and that Margaret would have wanted me to support our daughter. But Margaret would never have told me to sleep in my own garage. The cold from the concrete floor seeped through the blanket as I listened to Brian's voice from above, likely explaining his latest business idea to Ashley. It was probably something about digital marketing or cryptocurrency, whatever had captured his attention that week. I could hear the same eager tone he had used to ask for the certification money, the marketing materials, and all the other investment opportunities that were supposed to change everything. I stacked the receipts in chronological order and saw the pattern clearly. It started as reasonable requests and progressed into obvious exploitation. The evidence was all there, written in my careful handwriting on each check stub. Ashley's car repair, Brian's business expenses, emergency dental work. Each excuse had seemed legitimate at the time. I heard footsteps overhead again, moving toward what used to be my side of the house. The bathroom door slammed. Water ran through the pipes I had installed myself back when Margaret was pregnant with Ashley, and we dreamed of our future grandchildren playing in these rooms. I gathered the receipts and slipped them into a clean envelope. $89,000 had bought a lot, but apparently not respect or gratitude. My fingers traced the bumps and imperfections on the concrete wall behind me. I decided then that tomorrow I would begin to make some changes. My filing cabinet had other folders I hadn't looked at in years. By 2 in the morning, I had cleared my entire workbench. Financial documents were arranged in precise rows, with each receipt and bank statement in chronological order. $89,000 of evidence was spread across the workbench, a testament to my 27 years of construction experience. From a shelf above my tools, I took down a thick binder labeled Legal References. My 25 years of running Nelson Construction had taught me about more than just foundations and electrical codes. I knew about contracts, liens, property law, and tenant rights. I found exactly what I needed in the Ohio Revised Code, Section 5B321. The words felt solid under my reading glasses. A landlord may terminate a periodic tenancy by notice given to the tenant. 30 days written notice. No cause required when there's no written lease agreement. I knew Ashley and Brian had never signed anything official. Our 3 years of arrangements had all been based on handshakes and unspoken assumptions. I grabbed my yellow legal pad and started writing. Phase 1, documentation, was already complete. Phase 2 was legal notification, which required a minimum of 30 days. Phase 3 was implementation. Next, I unrolled the blueprints for the house across the clean workbench. Every room was marked in my careful drafting pencil, just as I had done in 1998. The master bedroom, the guest room that they converted into Brian's office, and the kitchen they insisted on upgrading. This was a property I had designed, built, and paid for myself. I could almost hear Margaret's voice in my memory telling me to keep good records, because I never knew when I'd need proof. She was always so smart, always thinking ahead. I flipped through the construction law manual to the section on property ownership rights, looking at occupancy agreements versus rental contracts and resident versus tenant classifications. Brian didn't qualify as either a family member or a legal tenant. My engineering notebook was open beside the legal texts. My usual equations and stress calculations were replaced with a different kind of problem solving. It was about variables and constants, known quantities, and optimal solutions. The same methodical approach I used to build 37 houses was now being used to dismantle their comfortable arrangement. The first variable was their financial dependency. They had become so used to my support that their entire lifestyle was built around it. If I removed the foundation, their whole structure would collapse. The second variable was their legal standing. Without a written lease, they had no tenant protections. They were simply guests who had overstayed their welcome. The third variable was Ashley's emotional manipulation, her primary weapon, but it was useless against documented evidence. I opened my laptop and found a word processor. The eviction notice template loaded slowly, filling the screen with official language and blanks for names, dates, and legal justifications. It was the same standard form I had used twice before with problem tenants in my rental properties. The words read, "Take notice that your tenancy of the above described premises is hereby terminated 30 days from the date of service of this notice." It was clean, professional, and legally binding. My printer hummed to life, feeding paper through the mechanisms I had maintained for 12 years. Black text appeared line by line, creating the first tool in my systematic plan. As dawn crept across the suburban street outside, casting long shadows through the garage door windows, I knew that inside, Ashley and Brian were sleeping soundly, believing their arrangement was permanent. I carefully folded the notice and slipped it into an envelope marked with Ashley's legal name. It was the first official document in what would become a comprehensive case file. The bottom drawer of my filing cabinet held my old business Rolodex, filled with contacts for lawyers, county officials, and other professional connections from my 3 decades in construction. These were people who knew my reputation and understood the importance of proper documentation and legal procedure. Despite the early hour, Robert Stevens answered on the second ring, asking me what had me calling before sunrise. 5 hours later, I sat across from him in his downtown Columbus office, watching as he meticulously arranged my financial documents across his mahogany desk. He used the same careful precision I had used in the garage, but he understood exactly what the numbers meant in legal terms. He traced his finger down my calculated total, $89,000 over 5 years, plus the documented property improvements they had requested, with no written lease or established tenancy terms. My leather briefcase sat open beside my chair, holding copies of everything: bank statements, receipts, home improvement records, and even photos of the garage conversion Ashley had demanded to make my new living situation more comfortable. Robert's office felt reassuringly solid. Law books lined the walls, and framed Ohio bar certifications and case files were stacked with the same organized efficiency I recognized from my own construction project management. My 27 years of building houses had taught me to recognize a competent professional. He confirmed that Ohio property law strongly favored owners in situations like this. Robert pulled a thick volume from the shelf and opened it to a marked page. The Ohio Revised Code, Section 5321-20 from 2017, specifically addressed the termination of month-to-month occupancy. He pointed to the highlighted text, 30 days written notice. No cause required when there's no formal lease. He explained that since I was the sole property owner and they had never paid rent or signed an agreement, they were legally considered guests, not tenants. I watched as he pulled official forms with county headers and legal seals from a filing cabinet. The same attention to detail I had used for building permits was now being applied to reclaiming my own house. He explained that the financial exploitation aspect strengthened my position considerably, spreading my receipts out in chronological order to illustrate his point. Courts, he said, recognize patterns of abuse, especially with clear documentation of escalating demands. My engineering notebook lay open next to the legal texts. My systematic timeline matched his professional assessment perfectly. How long does the process take? I asked as I watched him organize the official forms into a case file. He told me it would be a minimum of 30 days from the notice delivery to sheriff enforcement, assuming they didn't comply on their own. He ran some numbers on his calculator with the same precision I had used on my construction budgets. He estimated the legal fees would run about $2,800 for the entire process, including court filings and enforcement coordination. That was less than I had spent on Brian's failed business ventures in the last year alone. Robert's printer hummed to life, feeding official notices through mechanisms I recognized from my own home office. Black text appeared line by line, creating the legal framework that would restore order to my property. At the top of the first page was the notice to terminate tenancy, followed by my name as the property owner and Ashley Nelson Cooper as the occupant. It was clean, professional language that transformed an emotional betrayal into an actionable legal remedy. Robert said he could have the documents ready for me to pick up that afternoon. He organized them into manila folders, labeling them with case numbers and filing dates. He explained that the notice had to be served according to Ohio statutes, either by personal delivery with a witness or by certified mail with a return receipt. The second form outlined the eviction procedures, timeline requirements, and sheriff's department contact information, everything I needed to reclaim my bedroom, my dignity, and my household after 3 years of gradual exploitation. He handed me a business card with his direct phone number written on the back, telling me to call him immediately if they tried to interfere or retaliate. He explained that property owners have significant legal protections in Ohio, and documenting any harassment would only strengthen our position. I stood up, gathering all my organized evidence back into my briefcase. I could feel the weight of the legal support behind every document, giving me the same confidence I had felt walking onto a construction site, knowing I had the expertise and resources to build something solid and lasting. There were still 40 minutes left on the parking meter when I reached my car, the legal notices secured in a sealed envelope marked "Personal Service Required." My 27 years in construction had taught me that the foundation determines everything else about a building. Now, it was time to rebuild my own. The kitchen counter was still cluttered with breakfast dishes when I walked through the garage door, the envelope clutched in my hand. Ashley was sitting at the table where Margaret and I had shared 27 years of morning coffee. She was scrolling through her phone with the casual confidence of someone who thought she had won a permanent victory. Without looking up from her screen, she said, "Dad, you're back early. I thought you'd spend the whole day sulking in your little workshop." I set the sealed envelope on the counter between us. My name was printed on the front in Robert Stevens's precise legal script. I told her I had been taking care of some business. Brian appeared in the doorway wearing one of the expensive polo shirts I had paid for during his last networking phase. His eyes darted between the envelope and my face, sensing something was different in my demeanor, but unable to figure out what had changed. Ashley finally looked up, her tone carrying that condescending edge she had perfected over the past 3 years. "What kind of business?" she asked. I opened the envelope methodically, unfolding the official document with the same precision I had used to review construction blueprints. "This is your 30-day notice to quit and deliver possession of the premises." The words hit the air like concrete settling into place. Ashley's phone slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the table. "What did you just say?" she whispered. I held the document so she could see the official letterhead, the county seal, and the formal legal language that transformed a family dispute into a judicial remedy. I told her she had 30 days to vacate my property. Brian stepped forward, his face pale. "Gerald, you can't be serious about this." I continued reading from the notice, my voice as steady as architectural specifications. "Failure to comply will result in Sheriff's Department enforcement. All legal requirements have been satisfied under Ohio landlord-tenant law." Ashley snatched the paper from my hands, her eyes scanning the text with growing desperation. She insisted that they weren't tenants, but family, and that I couldn't evict my own daughter. I calmly pulled out the second document Robert had prepared, a legal summary of a property owner's rights. I explained that since they had never paid rent, signed a lease, or established any legal tenancy, Ohio law classified them as guests who had overstayed their welcome. The blood drained from her face as she read the legal language. Her hands trembled slightly, making the paper rustle. Brian, looking like a spectator at a tennis match, was clearly out of his depth. He suggested we work out some kind of arrangement since they had been contributing to the household. I let the number $89,000 settle into the silence. I told him that was what I had contributed to their household over the last 5 years, and that the documentation was attached to her copy of the eviction notice. Her eyes widened as she looked through the pages, seeing her wedding expenses, Brian's failed business investments, and months of unemployment support, all meticulously organized. She asked in disbelief if I had kept track of everything. I told her that construction projects required detailed financial records, and legal proceedings required the same documentation standards. She tried her old manipulation tactic, softening her voice to a tone that used to make me pull out my checkbook. She said this wasn't like me and that families don't throw each other out on the street. I countered that families also don't force their fathers to sleep in garages. I collected the documents and slipped them back into their official envelope, letting her know that the notice had been served and the 30-day countdown had begun. Brian nervously cleared his throat and asked if paying rent would change the legal situation, but I told him the eviction notice was final. As I headed toward the garage, she made her most desperate appeal, asking how I could evict my own grandchild. I paused in the doorway and told her that Tommy would always be welcome in my house, but his parents had 30 days to find their own. The garage door clicked shut behind me. From inside the house, I could hear Ashley's voice rise to a near-hysterical pitch, punctuated by Brian's ineffective attempts at damage control. I had built this timeline to last. I heard her voice again, this time with a manufactured desperation, asking me to come back inside and talk to her reasonably. I stepped back into the kitchen, watching her arrange her features into the wounded expression she had used so effectively during her teenage years. I knew it was a performance, just like when contractors tried to renegotiate after signing a contract. I kept my voice level and told her there was nothing reasonable to discuss. The legal notice had been served. Her eyes filled with practiced tears as she asked how I could throw away everything we meant to each other, reminding me that she was my daughter, my only child. I told her that was exactly why this conversation should have been unnecessary. I reached for the coffee pot, maintaining a casual routine to show my emotional detachment. I told her that business decisions don't change based on family relationships. Brian, looking nervous, tried to work something out, but I simply stated that the eviction notice was final and any further discussion should be with my lawyer, Robert Stevens. Ashley's performance shifted toward a guilty desperation as she brought up Margaret, saying that Mom would be heartbroken to see me treating her daughter this way and that she always said, "Family comes first." I set my coffee mug down with deliberate care, remembering Margaret's actual words. I told Ashley that her mother had also said I should stop enabling her irresponsible behavior and that tough love builds character. The truth hit Ashley like a missed deadline, and her carefully orchestrated tears faltered, replaced by genuine panic. She accused me of rewriting history to justify being cruel. I replied that I was applying the same business principles I had used for 30 years and that emotional appeals don't override legal obligations. She then asked if I was willing to destroy our relationship forever over money. I told her she had destroyed our relationship when she demanded I sleep in my own garage. My words came out clean and precise, like construction-grade steel. I was simply formalizing the arrangement she had initiated. Brian found his voice, asking about Tommy and how he would grow up remembering that his grandfather threw his family out. I replied that Tommy would remember that his grandfather maintained his dignity and that he would also remember which of his parents provided financial stability versus which ones lived as dependents. Ashley's control cracked completely, and she admitted they had nowhere else to go. I calmly reminded her that she had had 3 years to develop somewhere else to go. I checked my watch with the same precision I used to manage construction timelines. There were 29 days and 14 hours remaining. Her voice climbed toward hysteria as she said this wasn't the father who taught her to ride a bicycle or the man who walked her down the aisle. I opened the legal folder and pulled out specific receipts, reminding her that the father who paid $12,000 for her wedding was the same man who had documented every financial sacrifice with engineering precision. She grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. "Please, Daddy," she begged. "I'm begging you. Don't do this to us." I looked down at her hand, the same hand that had demanded I move to the garage and dismissed my concerns about Brian's employment. 30 years of construction negotiations had taught me that successful manipulation required emotional engagement, and I felt nothing but professional recognition of her desperate tactics. I gently removed her hand from my arm and stated that the notice period had begun today and any violation of the terms would result in immediate sheriff's enforcement. Ashley's face cycled through shock, rage, and despair before settling on a cold calculation. Her performance had failed, leaving her with no familiar weapons. For the first time in 3 years, she looked at me like I was a stranger. Her voice now carried a different quality, harder and more dangerous, as she said, "Fine, if that's how you want to play this game." The word game hung in the air. I knew the rules were about to change. She stepped closer to Brian, whispering urgently to him to show him we're serious and that I needs to understand. Brian's shoulders tensed as her instructions registered. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight like a contractor trying to avoid discussing cost overruns. But Ashley's desperation had found a new target, and she pushed harder, telling him he was bigger than me and that I was 62 years old. I continued organizing my legal papers with deliberate calm, watching as Brian tried to summon an intimidation he had never needed before. 30 years on construction sites had taught me to recognize the difference between a genuine threat and amateur posturing. He took a step forward, clearing his throat with forced authority. He suggested I reconsider the eviction, saying I didn't want the situation to get unpleasant. I looked up from my documents and asked him how exactly it would be unpleasant. His voice carried the forced confidence of someone reading from a script Ashley had hastily written. "If you keep pushing this legal nonsense, things might get complicated." I set my pen down and turned to face him fully, asking if he was threatening me in my own house. His face flushed, caught between Ashley's pressure and his own discomfort. He stepped closer, trying to use his height advantage, saying I was outnumbered. I almost smiled. 27 years of managing construction crews had included more physical confrontations than Brian had likely seen in movies. I told him in a conversational tone that he had never thrown a punch in his life and that he had never worked a job where men settled disagreements with anything besides words and lawyers. His confidence wavered visibly. I stepped forward, closing the distance he had tried to establish. A lifetime of dealing with aggressive men had taught me how to project authority without aggression. He instinctively stepped back, his amateur intimidation dissolving like sugar in rain. I kept moving forward until he retreated against the kitchen counter. I had been handling bigger threats than him during my coffee breaks for 3 decades. Ashley watched from the sidelines, her whispered coaching forgotten, as she witnessed her husband's complete deflation. I kept my eyes on Brian, reading his body language, and told her that her husband wasn't stupid enough to assault me. I said he knew the legal consequences and that he had never been in a real fight. Brian's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the counter behind him, saying it wasn't over. I simply replied, "Yes, "It is," and returned to my paperwork, dismissing his threat as casually as I would a subcontractor's unreasonable demands. The silence stretched across the kitchen. Ashley stared at her husband's retreating form and called him pathetic. Brian paused in the doorway, his face burning with humiliation. "I tried," he said. "You tried nothing," she said, turning on him with a fury she couldn't direct at me. "You let a senior citizen back you down in 30 seconds. I gathered the legal documents into their folder, watching the family dynamics crumble in real time. I calmly told them the eviction notice remained in effect and that they had 29 days and 13 hours remaining." Ashley's voice climbed toward hysteria again. "Fine, if that's how you want to play this." She stormed toward the front door, grabbing her keys with violent determination. "Where are you going?" Brian called after her. "To find someone who can actually help us." The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the windows Margaret and I had installed in 1999. Brian remained in the doorway, deflated and humiliated, looking like a contractor who had just realized his bid was $20,000 too low. I opened my laptop and began typing. It was time to cut off their financial oxygen. 2 hours later, I pulled into the driveway, feeling a satisfaction as solid as poured concrete. My trip to the bank had taken exactly 18 minutes, thanks to the same efficiency I used for permit applications and inspection schedules. Brian was still in the kitchen when I returned, nursing a beer and avoiding eye contact. He asked where I had gone, and I told him I had performed some routine account maintenance. The lie wasn't really a lie. Revoking Ashley's access to my money was long overdue maintenance. In my pocket, the bank documents confirmed that I had terminated all her secondary user privileges, including her debit card and online access. Brian, grasping for straws, asked if Ashley was still out looking for help. I asked him from whom. He suggested maybe legal aid or her friend Madison, who works for a real estate company. I sipped my coffee and suggested she might want to address her more immediate financial situation first. He looked confused. Before he could ask what I meant, Ashley's car pulled into the driveway, the aggressive speed showing she had spent 2 hours learning that legal aid offices don't handle eviction cases filed by property owners with legitimate legal representation. She stormed inside, frustrated, complaining that the legal system was rigged and that every attorney she talked to wanted $5,000 upfront just to review the case. I told her that seemed reasonable. With deliberate casualness, I opened my laptop and told her that, unfortunately, she no longer had access to money for anything. She stared at the screen, confused by the account access restricted notification. She asked me what it meant. I told her I had simply removed her name from my checking account, terminating all her debit card and online banking access. She insisted I couldn't do that, but I corrected her, stating that it was my account and that I had the right to change permissions. Brian finally understood the scope of my plan and asked how they were supposed to buy groceries or pay for gas. I closed the laptop and told him those were excellent questions and that I suggested they find jobs to pay for those necessities. Ashley frantically tried to log into her banking app, but the login failed. She said what I was doing wasn't legal and that I couldn't just steal their money. I corrected her again, telling her I hadn't stolen anything. I had simply stopped giving them money. I told her that every dollar they had spent for the past 3 years had come from my labor, savings, and retirement fund. She stared at her useless debit card, and I told them I expected them to find jobs, pay rent, and act like the independent adults they claimed to be. I gathered my coffee and papers and walked away, telling them they had 28 days to figure it out. Ashley's voice climbed with desperation, saying they couldn't survive without my money. I told her that perhaps she shouldn't have demanded that her primary source of money sleep in the garage. As I walked out, her phone rang, likely another legal aid office. 3 hours later, Ashley came to the garage, approaching cautiously as if it were a dangerous construction site. Her fury was gone, replaced by a calculated humility, a performance I had seen before from contractors trying to salvage a failed project. "Dad," she said, her voice soft. She wanted to talk about everything that's happened today. She stepped carefully into the garage, her hands clasped in front of her. She said she had been thinking about what I said and that she had realized she was completely wrong. I knew it was a rehearsed presentation, and I asked her what she was wrong about. She looked at me with practiced regret, admitting that the garage situation was selfish and disrespectful and that she wanted to make things right. I set down my pen and asked her how she planned to do that. She spoke quickly, as if speed could make her shallow concession more believable, saying I should move back to my bedroom immediately and that she and Brian would find alternative arrangements for his office. I repeated her phrase, using the same professional skepticism I would with a contractor who offered vague solutions to a specific problem, such as maybe convert part of the living room or use the dining room table for his computer work. And what about the fundamental issues of respect and financial exploitation? I asked. Her composure flickered. I know we've been dependent on your support, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for us. Grateful? I leaned back in my chair, watching her scramble for footing on unstable ground. $89,000 worth of grateful, I stated. That number feels exaggerated when you include normal family expenses, she said. Every receipt is documented and categorized, I replied, pulling out the financial summary I'd prepared. Would you like to review the calculations? Ashley's tactical humility shifted toward defensive justification, a pattern I'd seen from contractors caught padding their bills. Family members help each other. That's what people do. Family members also respect property ownership and contribute to household expenses. What specific changes are you proposing to address those issues? Her rehearsed apologies hadn't prepared her for detailed questioning. Brian's been working hard on his business development, and once his consulting firm takes off, 3 years of business development with zero income, I interrupted with the precision of rejecting an unrealistic project timeline. What's your backup plan? Maybe I could look for temporary work while Brian focuses on the business launch, she said. I almost smiled at the familiar deflection. Temporary work to cover what specific expenses? Ashley's performance began unraveling under professional scrutiny. Basic necessities, I guess. Groceries, utilities, our share of household costs. Your share being what percentage of total household expenses? I don't know the exact breakdown. 47%, I said, pulling out the calculated figures based on occupancy, utility usage, and consumption patterns over 3 years. The mathematical precision hit her like an unexpected change order on a fixed-price contract. Ashley stared at the numbers, clearly unprepared for the business-like evaluation of her vague promises. Dad, I'm trying to apologize here. Can't we work out some kind of arrangement that lets us stay while we get back on our feet? What guarantees can you provide for future behavior? I asked, applying the same criteria I'd used for evaluating contractor commitments. What specific, measurable changes will demonstrate this claimed transformation? Her desperation broke through the tactical performance. I just need access to the account restored so we can function while we figure things out. There it was. The real objective behind her manufactured humility. Ashley wasn't offering genuine change. She wanted temporary relief from consequences. I see. I closed the financial folder, watching her realize she'd revealed her true priorities. So, your plan is to restore the status quo while promising eventual improvements. It's not like that. That's exactly what it's like. I stood, remembering every contractor who'd made similar promises under pressure. I've heard these negotiations before, Ashley. Different setting, same desperation. Her careful composure cracked completely. This isn't some business transaction. We're family. Family members don't force their fathers into garages. Ashley's frustration boiled over into the anger she'd been suppressing. Fine. What exactly do you want from us? The question hung in the air like dust settling after demolition. It was time to present the real terms. 2 hours later, I called them both into the living room with the same formal tone I'd used summoning subcontractors to discuss contract violations. Ashley and Brian arranged themselves on the couch like defendants awaiting sentencing, their earlier confidence replaced by wary anticipation. This is my final offer for remaining in this house, I said. I opened the legal pad where I'd outlined specific, measurable terms. These conditions are non-negotiable. Ashley leaned forward, hope flickering in her eyes like a contractor hearing about potential change orders. Okay, what are you thinking? First requirement, complete financial independence within 60 days, I read from my notes. Documented employment with verifiable income sufficient to cover all personal expenses. Her face shifted from hope to concern. 60 days isn't very much time. Second requirement, formal acknowledgement of property ownership rights. I continued without interruption. Written agreement recognizing my authority over all decisions regarding my house, including occupancy arrangements. Brian shifted uncomfortably. Gerald, maybe we could extend that timeline to something more realistic. Third requirement, financial reimbursement plan for documented exploitation. I pulled out the calculated figures. $89,000 in support provided without consent or gratitude. Repayable at minimum wage equivalent work hours. Ashley's mouth fell open. You want us to pay back money you gave us voluntarily? Money I provided under false pretenses. I corrected, my tone level. The same approach I'd used explaining cost overruns to stunned property owners. Support given based on assumed temporary need, extended through manipulation and entitled demand. That's completely unreasonable. Ashley stood, pacing like a contractor realizing their bid was catastrophically low. We're family, not business partners. Family members don't force their fathers into garages, I said. I turned the page to additional requirements. Fourth condition, a behavioral contract with measurable compliance standards. A behavioral contract? Brian asked, clearly uncomfortable with the terminology. Documented respectful behavior toward property ownership, elimination of entitled demands, and contribution to household responsibilities, I explained. I looked up from my notes. Violations result in immediate eviction enforcement. Ashley stopped pacing. Her tactical mind processed the impossible scope of genuine accountability. These aren't terms for staying, Dad. These are punishments designed to make us leave. These are the minimum requirements for adult behavior in someone else's house. I closed the legal pad, watching her realize the fundamental gap between her expectations and my standards I should have enforced 3 years ago. She tried one more angle, softening her voice. Can't we work out something more reasonable? Maybe start with smaller changes and build up to. No. The word hit the air like a final inspection failure. Gradual improvement has been your promise for 3 years while the exploitation escalated. Brian cleared his throat nervously. What if we agreed to some of these terms, but adjusted the timeline? All requirements are final and immediate. I stood, ending the negotiation with the same finality I'd used closing unsuccessful project bids. Compliance begins tonight, or eviction enforcement begins tomorrow. Ashley's calculated humility cracked completely, revealing the entitled fury underneath. This is insane. You're treating us like criminals instead of your own family. I'm treating you like adults who made adult decisions and face adult consequences. I gathered my legal documents. Your response to these terms tells me everything I need to know about your commitment to genuine change. So, what's it going to be? Brian asked, though his tone suggested he already knew their answer. Ashley looked at the legal pad, at me, at Brian, then back at the impossible requirements for accountability and respect. Her silence spoke louder than any negotiation attempt. Fine. Her voice carried the cold finality of someone choosing confrontation over compromise. If that's how you want to end our relationship. I didn't end our relationship, Ashley, I said, walking toward the garage door. You ended it when you demanded I sleep in my own garage. The legal pad remained on the coffee table between us like an unsigned contract. 27 days until sheriff enforcement. Though after tonight, I suspected we wouldn't need to wait that long. My phone rang as I reached the garage. Robert Stevens was probably calling to confirm if we'd need to accelerate the timeline. Gerald, how did the final negotiation go? I looked back through the garage door at Ashley and Brian, huddled in furious conversation on the couch. Exactly as expected, I answered. They chose confrontation over accountability. Should I prepare the sheriff enforcement paperwork? Not yet. I watched Ashley gesturing angrily while Brian nodded along with her fury. Something tells me they're planning to escalate this themselves. Through the window, I could see Ashley reaching for her phone with the determined expression of someone calling in reinforcements. Let me know when you need legal backup, Robert said. Tomorrow morning, I replied, watching my daughter's face illuminate in the phone's glow. I have a feeling things are about to get interesting. 30 days later, I watched from my kitchen window as the Franklin County Sheriff's vehicle pulled into my driveway at exactly 10 o'clock in the morning. Deputy Martinez stepped out with the same professional efficiency I'd admired in quality subcontractors, carrying the official eviction paperwork Robert Stevens had prepared a month ago. The legal process had proceeded with clockwork precision. No appeals, no delays, No last-minute negotiations. Ashley and Brian had spent their 30 days exactly as I predicted, hoping for a miracle that never came, making calls to lawyers they couldn't afford, and gradually accepting the reality that professional legal procedures don't bend to emotional manipulation. Mr. Nelson, Deputy Martinez approached with businesslike courtesy. We're here to execute the court-ordered eviction. All documentation appears to be in proper order. I handed him the copies of every legal filing, each form completed with the same attention to detail I'd applied to construction permits for 30 years. Everything you need should be there. The occupants have been properly notified according to Ohio statutes. Ashley appeared in the doorway behind me, her face pale, but resigned. The fury and entitlement had burned out weeks ago, replaced by the hollow recognition that all her manipulation tactics had failed against systematic legal procedure. "How long do we have?" she asked the deputy, her voice carrying none of the demanding tone I'd heard for 3 years. "A standard time frame for personal property removal is 4 hours," Martinez replied with professional neutrality. "We'll supervise the process to ensure compliance with the court order." Brian emerged from the bedroom carrying boxes they had obviously prepared in advance. No dramatic protests, no final emotional appeals. They'd finally learned that legal authority doesn't negotiate with feelings. I remained in the kitchen, drinking coffee from Margaret's favorite mug, watching the methodical restoration of order to my property. The moving truck they had rented sat in the driveway like a concrete mixer on a construction site. Practical equipment for a necessary job. Deputy Martinez supervised the loading process with the same professional detachment I'd used managing difficult projects. No unnecessary drama, no personal involvement, just efficient execution of properly filed legal documents. "Where are you taking the child?" I asked Ashley as she carried Tommy's toys toward the truck. "Madison's letting us stay in her guest room until we figure something out." Ashley's response carried no accusation, no attempt to make me feel guilty. The fight had gone out of her completely. Tommy appeared at her side, confused, but not distressed. 3-year-olds adapt to change more easily than entitled adults. "Grandpa Gerald, are we moving?" "Your parents are moving, Tommy," I said, kneeling down to his level, remembering that none of this was his fault. "You'll always be welcome to visit me here." Ashley's eyes filled with tears, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from her in months. But she said nothing, just nodded and continued loading boxes. 2 hours later, the truck was full, and the house was mine again. Deputy Martinez handed me the completion paperwork with the satisfaction of a job properly finished. "Eviction successfully executed," he confirmed. "Property is now restored to full owner control." Ashley stood beside the loaded truck, looking back at the house where she'd lived for 3 years without paying rent, without showing respect, without recognizing that generosity has limits. "I'm sorry it came to this, Dad." The apology was real this time. Too late, but real. "So am I," I replied, and meant it. Brian started the truck engine while Ashley climbed into the passenger seat. No final arguments, no threats, no promises to make things right. Just the quiet acceptance of consequences they'd spent 30 days avoiding. I watched them drive away down the street where Margaret and I had walked every evening for 27 years. The same street where Ashley had learned to ride her bicycle, where we'd waited for school buses and celebrated birthdays. Now it was quiet again. Deputy Martinez completed his paperwork and shook my hand. "Property disputes like this one usually get messy, Mr. Nelson. Your documentation made this about as clean as these things get." 30 years of construction work teaches you to keep proper records, I replied. After he left, I walked through my house, truly my house again, noting the spaces they had occupied. The dining room no longer cluttered with Brian's business papers. The guest room restored to its original purpose. My bedroom back where it belonged. On the kitchen counter, Ashley had left her copy of the house key. I picked it up and dropped it into the drawer where Margaret had kept spare keys for everything. Some doors, once closed, should stay that way. The coffee was still warm in Margaret's mug. I sat down at my own kitchen table and enjoyed the silence. 6 hours later, I stood in the doorway of my master bedroom for the first time in 5 years, holding fresh linens Margaret had bought the year before she died. The afternoon sunlight streamed through windows that no longer faced into a garage conversion or makeshift office space. Just the oak tree we'd planted for Ashley's 5th birthday. Everything looked exactly as it should. My dresser against the north wall, Margaret's jewelry box on the vanity, the reading chair where I had spent countless evenings with construction manuals and project specifications. The room felt larger somehow, as if reclaiming it had expanded the very walls. I stripped away the emergency bedding I'd been using in the garage, replacing it with sheets that smelled like the lavender sachets Margaret had tucked into every linen closet. Simple domestic tasks that felt like architectural restoration, returning each element to its proper structural position. The phone rang as I finished making the bed. Robert Stevens was probably calling to confirm the legal completion paperwork. "Gerald, how does victory feel?" "Quiet," I answered, smoothing the comforter with the same precision I'd used leveling foundations. "Professional. No regrets about the family situation?" I looked around the bedroom where Margaret and I had planned Ashley's future, where we discussed college funds and wedding expenses and grandchildren. "I regret that it became necessary. I don't regret that it worked." "The legal process performed exactly as designed," Robert observed. "Property rights protected, proper procedures followed, appropriate consequences delivered. Like a well-built house," I agreed. "Strong foundation, quality materials, professional execution." After hanging up, I walked through each room methodically, noting the restored order. The dining room table clear of Brian's endless business plans. The living room arranged for actual living rather than storage. The guest bedroom returned to its intended purpose. In the kitchen, Margaret's coffee mug sat clean in the dish drainer where I had left it that morning. 5 years ago, I'd drunk coffee from that mug while Ashley demanded I finance her wedding. Today, I'd used it to toast my own independence. The garage still held my workbench and tools, but now they served their original purpose, building and fixing things rather than housing an exiled homeowner. I'd already started sketching plans for the workshop expansion I'd wanted to build before Ashley and Brian moved in. 30 years of construction work had taught me that the most satisfying projects were restorations, taking something damaged or misused and returning it to proper function. Today felt like the completion of my most important restoration project. The house phone rang again, this time an unfamiliar number. "Mr. Nelson, this is Madison Walsh. Ashley asked me to call you." Margaret's jewelry box caught the late afternoon light as I considered whether to hang up. "What does she want?" "She wanted me to tell you that she understands now. What you did, why you did it." Madison's voice carried careful neutrality. "She said to tell you that she's looking for work and Brian started applying for actual jobs today. Good for them. She also wanted you to know that Tommy asks about you every day. He keeps asking when he can visit Grandpa Gerald's house again." This conversation required more consideration than sheriff's deputies or legal procedures. "Tommy's welcome anytime Ashley wants to bring him by. Normal visiting hours like any other grandparent." "She'd like that. Maybe next weekend." "Saturday afternoon works fine." I kept my voice neutral, professional, 1-hour visits until we established new patterns. "I'll let her know. Gerald, for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing." The call ended with the same business-like closure I'd used completing construction contracts. Clear terms, reasonable boundaries, professional expectations. Evenings settled over the neighborhood as I prepared dinner in my own kitchen, using my own table in my own house. The silence felt profound after 5 years of constant negotiation and conflict. No demands for money, no entitled assumptions about my resources, no manipulation disguised as family loyalty. Just the quiet satisfaction of restored order. Margaret's photograph smiled at me from the mantel, surrounded by the same family pictures that had always been there before Ashley learned to weaponize sentiment and Brian discovered the profit potential in helplessness. Tomorrow, I'd call the contractors about that workshop expansion. Maybe explore some travel plans I'd postponed for 5 years. Investigate volunteer opportunities that didn't involve subsidizing adult children's lifestyle choices. Tonight, I'd sleep in my own bed, in my own room, in my own house. Some victories taste better than others. This one tasted like freedom.